Happy Friday, everybody. Good morning to you. It's Friday. It's the end of a good week. It's been a good week, and it's the end of a good week in the Word. We are finishing the book of Lamentations today after we finished the book of Jeremiah. So for those of you who've really gone the extra mile, stayed in there, plugged away, this has been a long season of Jeremiah, but anyway, we wrap it up today with Lamentations chapter 5, and I'm glad you're with me. Thank you for reading this with me. I've really enjoyed it, and as I've said, my previous readings of Jeremiah Lamentations weren't always that thrilling, but I've really enjoyed it with you. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I feel like the Lord has really spoken to us together. So anyway, I'm proud of what we've done, and I'm excited to finish this. But listen, we're not done yet. Lamentations chapter 5. Been talking about how the chapters of Lamentations are individually acrostics. You know, the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. Each of these chapters has 22 verses. Each verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. You know, Aleph, Bayit, all the way through the alphabet, except for chapter 3, which has 3 verses for every letter of the alphabet. So you have 66 verses in Lamentations chapter 3, kind of the centerpiece, artistic centerpiece of the book. Lamentations chapter 5 is not the artistic centerpiece of the book. It kind of falls apart. There's still 22 verses, but I think Jeremiah's hoping you didn't notice that it's not a very strict acrostic this time. He kind of does what he wants to, makes it look like an acrostic. It's in acrostic form, so stylistically it looks like the other chapters, but it's about a quart low in actually, acrostic quality. It's sort of like toward the end of the book of Job, when the friends' speeches had been so long and glorious, and at the end it's like, chapter 5. I'm not saying it's like that. I'm just saying that chapter 5, it's almost like he's run out of words. There are fewer lines per section, per letter, and again, he doesn't really strictly follow the alphabet either. Some scholars try to force it. They'll look for that consonant in that sentence. There it is. There it is. There's your D right there. Well, that's not an acrostic. That's not how acrostics work. So chapter 5 is no longer strictly following the artistic form, although there's the basic structure of an acrostic. But it's still a beautiful oracle. It's a beautiful, beautiful ending to the book. It starts in verse 1 with the kind of invocation, which we really haven't had before. But this is, addressing God directly, which sort of makes the whole chapter, this whole chapter 5, almost like a prayer. Lord, remember what has happened to us. I love that. The idea, of course, is if the Lord sees it, if the Lord knows about it, then we know he'll act. God's not going to, know and see and not do something. You understand? And so there's just this, calling out for God to look, to remember, to see this. Remember that the word provision has to do with seeing, vision, to see before. So, for God to provide a way, an answer, a resolution, we need him to see, And so there's just this plea for God to see, to remember what's happened to the people. See how we've been disgraced. Understand? Knowing that if God sees it, if he knows it, he'll do something. It's actually a call for God to act. Verse 2 speaks of the inheritance. Our inheritance is turned over to strangers. This is an interesting kind of appeal to God. You want to be, of course, you want to fear God. It's the beginning of wisdom. So you don't just come right. I mean, sometimes we do, but this particular prayer tries its best to address the Almighty with incredible respect and deference. And so in this, our inheritance has been turned over to strangers. Well, this is interesting because to call it the inheritance is to remind God that you gave this to us. Our inheritance. It's the promised land. You gave this to us. And then now it's been turned over is a passive way of saying, God, you turned it over. You see that? Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers. It's a polite, very respectful way of laying this at God's feet. God, there's no escaping the fact that God is responsible. There is a very subtle accusation here, although it's actually the truth. God has, orchestrated all of these events. Verse 3, we are orphaned and fathers, our mothers are widowed. The Hebrew there is our mothers are like widows. Some English translations will retain that like widows. And you think, well, how can you be like a widow? Either you are a widow or you're not a widow. How can you be like a widow? Well, remember that most of the men aren't necessarily killed. They were taken into exile. And so the women no longer have, the families no longer have the men in the families. They have young men, but any man of any age was taken off into exile. So the women are like widows. Did you understand that? Why he chooses that language? Now, let me talk about verse 7, because verse 7 stands out to me. I've assumed, and I still assume, that Jeremiah writes Lamentations. But in verse 7, our ancestors sinned, but they have died, and now we're suffering for the punishment that they deserved. That doesn't sound like something Jeremiah would say. Although he said it, but we just read Jeremiah. You read it with me. And there are all those places in Jeremiah chapter 16, 12, where he says, your ancestors sinned and you're worse than they were. Again, Jeremiah speaking for God there, just saying, your ancestors were they were rat finks, but you're worse than they are. And then verse 14, 20, he says, our ancestors sinned, but we've all sinned. So Jeremiah has never allowed the people to avoid the burden of repentance by distancing themselves from the sin. How do you don't get to say now, hey, we're only suffering this because, our parents, ate sour grapes and now our teeth are being, you remember the old verse, parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. The grapes were sour that the parents ate and the children's lips pucker, No, that's not how sin works. And so verse 7 kind of stands out to me, but you have to realize, and I've had to sort of think through the complicated interplay between personal responsibility and communal responsibility. You understand? In other words, the ancestors sinned, and they will answer for their sins, and this generation will answer for their sins. But it doesn't erase the fact that future generations can continue to suffer consequences for other people's sins. God doesn't punish innocent people for the sins of others, but innocent people can suffer because of the sins of others. Have you ever been the victim of a crime? Understand? God wasn't punishing you, I would say, by having somebody break in your house and conk you in the head, but you suffered the consequences of somebody else's sinful choice. And in this case, the breakdown of the society, the terrible leaders that failed and led the nation into this terrible situation, that goes way back. And speaking of leadership, our children will suffer because of the way my generation and my parents' generation have made such foolish political choices. We have continued for generations to elect very, very poor leaders for whatever dumb reasons we had. And now our nation is being governed by fools. And that's on us. We live in a democracy. So we get the leaders we deserve. We get the leaders we have chosen, like it or not. We've chosen these leaders, and this nation will suffer for generations. Our kids don't deserve it, but they're going to suffer for it. So understand, there's that complicated interplay between personal responsibility and then communal suffering. You see what I'm saying? So like I say, verse 7 kind of sounds like Jeremiah, that doesn't sound like something you would say, but I get what he's saying. And the validity of it continues to stand. Jeremiah, in this final oracle, goes through groups of people that are suffering: the women, the young women, the virgins, the leaders, the young men. Young men are led away to work at millstones, verse 13. This isn't like, the everyday grinding that you would do in your house. Millstones, we're talking now about the grinding that would be done by animals, like the turning of the giant millstones, giant millwork that would be driven by oxen. But there are no animals. People killed the animals and ate them for food during the siege, or the animals were taken by the Babylonians. There are no animals now to do the heavy work. And so the young men are out there working like oxen. They're having to do the work of, of bull elephants. They've got to go out there and work like beasts because there are no animals to do that heavy work. Joy has left our hearts. Our dancing has turned to mourning. Again, it's just a heartbreaking description of the plight of the people. But Book of Lamentations, it doesn't end with resolution, but it does end with an eye toward the future, an eye toward hope. Lord, you remain the same forever. Lamentation, in this particular chapter 5, it raises a lot of things for God. God, please look and see these things. It never questions God's prerogative and right to punish sin and to punish the people. But it does end with a series, and in the Hebrew it's very obvious. Verses 19 to 22 are just a series of why questions. New Living Translation will change some of that. Why do you continue to forget us? Why have you abandoned us for so long? Restore us, O Lord, and bring us back to you again. So again, it doesn't resolve necessarily all of the suffering and pain. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it does point us toward this future that is open for the Lord to come and do what only he can do. And he will restore and he will save them. You and I know that on this side of it, but Jeremiah still writes in the dark side of things. Anyway, way to go. You finished Lamentations. You finished Jeremiah. Whew. I've had y'all in the Old Testament for a while. We still got more Old Testament to read the New Testament. So we can't just stay in the New Testament, y'all. We'll never get the Bible read. But we are going to turn back, take a deep breath, and enjoy some more of Paul's writing. So we're going to do the book of Colossians next. Colossians chapter 1, verses 1 to 29 for Monday. Colossians chapter 1, verses 1 to 29. Back to the New Testament, y'all. We're going to love it. Book of Colossians. I love it. I can't wait. And I will be here for you. I'll be here with you Monday morning at 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim, Lord willing. If you don't have a church home, Woodburn Baptist Church, we'd love to have you on Sunday. I've been doing a series called Male and Female. We've done male and female in bodies, male and female in sex, male and female in marriage, and this coming Sunday, male and female in the body of Christ. Let's talk about men and women together serving the Lord as partnerships in mission and ministry. That Sunday morning here at Woodburn Baptist Church, 8, 9, 30, and 11. If I don't see you then, I will see you, Lord willing, at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. I love you guys so much, all right?